My name is Leo Flor, and I work at King County, and I'm joined by my colleagues Gretchen Bruce and Adam Schmid
Hello.
and Laird Redway. And our job is around implementation of the Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services Levy. And then if we could, we did it on the phone, but perhaps we could just get folks in the room quickly to introduce themselves and the organization that they work with. And Denise, if you would be.
My name is Denise Rodriguez. I'm Deputy Director of the Washington Homeownership Resource Center.
I'm here for Northwest Justice Project.
Brian Baker, Northwest Justice Project.
Sarah Robbins, Solid Ground. Leon Caskey, State Working Center.
Great. Just as a fundamental point, the goal today is to answer questions. So we've got some material that we'll move through, but as you have a question, and particularly for folks on the phone where it can be sometimes difficult to get in with a question, just blurt it out. And it's not derailing anything, it's not delaying anything. That's the entire point of today, is to be responsive to folks' questions. If we don't know the answer here today, we will record the question, and then we will go back and then put it out in an update to the frequently asked questions that are appended in the library to the actual Zoom Grants application itself. So with that, what we can do is, this is the RFP for prevention of inappropriate housing loss. And that is not a pithy term, but we mentioned it on the phone in an update call. That really actually came about from a couple of stakeholder groups with many of the organizations that are in the room right now about 2 years ago, where we said, what are the sort of housing related legal issues? And a lot of them, evictions and unlawful detainers comes out certainly, but there are a lot of things that are not evictions and unlawful detainers, those being the same thing. There are informal evictions, there are things to do with owning a home, there are income issues, there are habitability issues, there are issues that might not rise to the level of a formal legal process. It might actually be advantageous to not allow something to rise to the level of a formal legal process. There is housing counseling out there. So the all-inclusive umbrella term is the prevention of inappropriate housing loss, and what that really, I think, is based upon is that there are, in some cases, at least in a legal sense, quote-unquote, appropriate loss, ways to lose housing, but what we're really seeking to do is to prevent things from rising to the legal case if we can, and then if we are in an instance where there's a legal proceeding going on to somebody's legal or housing status in question, that we're getting laws applied fairly, and that people have the benefit of counsel or other advice and are not at least not able to access that advice or counsel because of their income. So that's the basic premise of what we're here to do. There's a lot of background information that we won't spend time on in terms of defining or scoping the issues. A lot of that's in the documentation that we've already put out into the community. But just by way, because I think it's a good representation, and this is specific only to one of the aspects, one of the key facts that we really found is that in 2017, there were more than 4,000 unlawful detainer cases in King County. I think it was 4,260 or something like that. And astonishingly, only 98 of the tenants had an attorney, less than 2%. And we know that the fact of representation in an eviction changes the outcomes. It doesn't always change whether or not a person is going to get evicted, but it can change the terms on which that might occur. It can change the consequences that result based on the way these things are negotiated. It can have to do with the amount of debt that's incurred or accrued during that process. And so giving people access to legal representation, giving people access to expertise that can prevent it from becoming a legal issue, giving people access to benefits or services that can solve a relatively minor financial issue that would otherwise escalate into a major financial issue. Those are all the sort of animating principles and problem definitions that we're working with here. So the levy, what we're going to do here really quickly is spend a little bit of time with the overall intent of the levy and what we're trying to accomplish here. And the reason to spend some time there is just because I do think it informs how the specific services will then be set up and provided. And the big thing that we're trying to accomplish here is with the levy connection. So we know that interpersonally, We actually have a huge issue with isolation in our community. It's something that we actually came across when we were talking to seniors. And it turns out that there's a ton of now empirical evidence that isolation will kill you sooner than not being isolated will kill you. In fact, it's more harmful to your health than smoking. 18 cigarettes a day is the number. I guess that's the sort of magic number of cigarettes. If you smoke less than that, maybe it's not as harmful. And then it's actually more predictive of reduced longevity than obesity. So being lonely will kill you. We also actually found then that it's not just for seniors. Veterans experience these issues. People coming back from incarceration experience these issues. Immigrants and refugees experience these issues. A lot of folks in our community don't feel like they're connected. So the reason we bring that up in the context of this RFP is one of the things we're really interested in is not just how can we provide services or fund others to provide services, but how can we fund others to provide services in ways that connect people to other people or edify those relationships that we think are actually probably as helpful in solving a lot of these social issues and personal issues as money might be or as a program might be. We actually think personal connection is a big part of the solution. The next set of connections, welcome, to talk about is program connections. So, and this is really, I think, where the levy can do the most as opposed to where the people providing the services can do the most. It is, I think, fair to say that the pattern in the provision of human services has historically been a program. Hopefully the people who use both of those programs get back and forth between the two, but there's no sort of intentional system level coordination of those programs so that they work together in ways that mitigate each other's weaknesses and amplify each other's strengths. And that really puts human services in an exceptional position relative to almost every other complicated industry. There are, medicine has figured this out, that if you begin to deploy different disciplines within medicine in ways that work together, you actually get better results. So this is holistic medicine. The way, we have this term combined arms, the military, which is my background. The first thing you learn is you don't send the infantry out by yourself. You don't send the cavalry out by itself. You always combine them. And you don't just tell them to work together. You intentionally plan it so you will be here first. And then when this condition is met, we will bring this force in. And when that condition is met, we will bring that force in. And it's something that is really stark, I think, to us that we don't do that in human services. And we are casting a wide net with human services when we talk here, including things like legal services as human services. So the question for us is, how can we begin to connect programs? And the way that that manifests itself in this RFP that folks will notice is that whether for seniors or for veterans, we have included language in the RFP about co-locating services. We've been more specific on the veteran side that we envision the actual provision of services here at the King County Veterans Program and in our other office in Belltown, where we are bringing about 1,200 clients through each office per year. And in the seniors part of the levy, we have been a little less specific, but senior centers we really see as becoming those hubs. And there's a slide that we'll talk about that on a minute. But that's how that combined arms idea really manifests itself in this RFP. And then the last piece, just to note it, is with combination, the community of providers is actually really isolated as well. So we know that there are a lot of folks that are actually serving the people that we all want to serve, and they themselves are feeling the ill effects of isolation. So how can we promote partnership amongst programs as opposed to competition amongst programs, which is going to sound a little bit ironic in the context of a request for proposal that is a competitive process. But I think what we are saying is that proposals that show ways to combine with other organizations are proposals that are going to be more persuasive. And this is just that idea that at the end of the day, there's not enough resources, there are too many clients, and we really should be building a system where people are helping each other to serve that number of clients, and not where we're having to have trade secrets and keep each other at arm's length because we don't want the other person to get the other money. So that's a little bit aspirational again, but we're, I think, really interested in helping to cultivate the creation of those sort of relationships amongst organizations. And we're going to have to figure out what that looks like as we go forward. The last piece I'll say here is just eligibility. One of the other guiding questions that we have for the levy is what can only the levy do? And this just stems from the fact that the levy is at the same time a lot of money and not a lot of money. So objectively, $55 million a year is a lot of money. Relative to the scale of need that we see in the community, $55 million is not a lot of money. And so we really do find ourselves prioritizing quite a bit. And one of the ways that we've prioritized in designing the overall plan is to ask this question of what can only the levy do? And that, I think, brings itself up in a couple interesting ways for this RFP. One of them is eligibility. Who is eligible to receive these services? We're talking here about seniors and veterans specifically. The levy does not carry with, for example, some of the federal constraints that limit the type of veteran that can be served or the immigration status of a person who might be able to be served. The levy does not have those sort of inherent limitations to it, and so it can be a very inclusive funding source. And so we've got a slide here later that will talk about definitions, but I think the bottom line preview on that is that we are very inclusive. I think it's actually the most inclusive statutory definition of veteran anywhere in the country. And we have defined senior as any person who is 55 or older, which sometimes rubs people who don't consider themselves to be seniors, but who might be 55 or older the wrong way. We do not intend offense, but we are, again, trying to be really inclusive, recognizing the fact that somebody who's 55 but experiencing one type of life might actually have a very different health or mental health status than another person who is 75 but has led a different life. So those are real disparities, and we are attempting, again, to be inclusive there. The last thing is you'll see the word caregiver. So technically, the levy has 3/3, 1/3 for veterans, defined inclusively, service members and their families, and then 1/3 for seniors and their caregivers, where caregivers is defined in a very specific way to include folks who provide care as long as they're not being paid a wage to provide that care. And then vulnerable populations, and if you were on the phone call, you heard us sort of go on about this, but that is not a great term. It is not particularly respectful, and yet it is sort of the least bad formulation we came up with to encompass the variety of folks that we're seeking to serve here. And the way that we've defined vulnerable population is, I think, is helpful, which is that it's a set of people upon whom systems have acted in ways that marginalize them. So racism, sexism, any number of other sort of societal factors that can decrease a person's ability to live a stably housed life, a healthy life, a socially engaged life, or a financially stable life. So that's the levy at a high level. We talked about this a little bit, but very specifically when we talk about combined arms, we envision each third of the levy having a set of hubs. So in the veterans third of the levy, the 2 King County Veterans Program offices become the hubs. And so this becomes one of the physical points of connection. To be clear here, we do not intend this in any way to become the only way to access services, but we intend this to become a way that is centralized to access services. And so if by no other route a person was able to access services, they would be able to access services here. But there is a specific part of this where in the contract negotiation phase, the other problem we've been trying to solve is historically the rate of acceptance of referral into organizations is actually really low from any particular source. And just to say it as a former legal aid attorney who specialized in veterans work, I'm well aware of the fact that we accepted a relatively low number of the referrals that came from the King County Veterans Program, for example. Not the fault of that organization. It's just there was no system set up to prefer a certain set of referrals. And so one of the things that we are taking a look at here is how do you reserve a certain amount of capacity from the referring organization, so in this case the King County Veterans Program, or from senior centers, to receive services that are funded by the levy. And again, that's how do we structurally create this sort of combined arms effect that we're after. Just the nomenclature in the plan, we won't spend a lot of time here. Strategy is a word that means everything and nothing. It's kind of like collaboration. People say it, and everyone hears something different. So in the levy, we have very specific nomenclature here. If you see a purple arrow anywhere, it's going to have one of the 5 result areas that the levy has been statutorily required to fulfill, and that's financial stability, housing stability, social engagement, healthy living, and then service system access and improvement. Below that, we have strategies. So within the healthy living result area, I think that there are 4 or 5 strategies, and then each strategy may have sort of sub-programs. And so for us in this one, we are within the housing stability result area, and then the prevention of inappropriate housing loss is one of the strategies within there. Please, next slide.
Do you want to cover quickly the programs? I think this is the only time we'll talk about the 4
Great.
elements.
So this RFP, I think 2 points to make here. This RFP is the first year of the new levy, so 2018, and it's what we're calling the transition plan, and it is in many ways a transition year. There are 4 different types of services or categories of service that this RFP seeks to provide for 2 distinct populations, and so you can sort that into a matrix if you'd like, with veterans column, seniors column, and then the 4 rows would then be civil legal aid, alternative dispute resolution, housing counseling, and then public benefits access. Just so folks know, in the 2019 through 23 plan, which we have pithily named the implementation plan, which is currently before the King County Council, and which we expect to achieve final passage on sometime late this summer. Those different sort of flavors of this particular strategy actually become their own programs, and they become funded at much higher levels as we've proposed it in the new plan. So there is a program for civil legal aid to prevent inappropriate housing loss. There is a separate program with its own funding stream for alternative dispute resolution. There is a separate program for housing counseling, and there is a separate program for public benefits. I think it's called leverage government benefits, and another good combination of words that don't mean a lot in and of themselves. And the other thing to note is in the implementation plan, it opens up so that these funds are available for all 3 of the levy's populations. So seniors, vulnerable populations, and for veterans and their families. I'm not going to read this. For a person who is interested, and Denise in a phone call earlier asked this question, but what guides us, what constrains us as we put this RFP out into the community? We are guided here by the Levy's transition plan, which is a council approved by ordinance document that's available. There are links to it, I think, peppered throughout the RFP. But this becomes the guiding language. So what the ordinance actually contains in its attachment is a concept and a rationale and a timeline for each of the activities. And so Denise Rodriguez asked a question in a previous meeting that I am here to correct my answer to, which was, would a program that sought to promote enrollments in the housing exemption, be one of the public benefits? I said no at the time because it had to be an income generating benefit. In looking at our guiding document, the actual language is as programs that can increase a senior's ability to pay for stable housing. So I think the reduction of that person's bill does fit into that. So just as an official matter, and we'll have it on the FAQ, enrollments in the senior and veterans tax exemption program that the state promulgates would be eligible expenditures of the public benefits sort of 4th stream of this RFP.
Is that in the senior and veteran language?
Correct. One of the things that folks will notice in the RFP itself is that there is a lot of language around making sure folks we're being transparent around data generation requirements. And there are 2 points that I want to make here. One is that we recognize that data generation is a complicated subject, particularly with organizations that have obligations to retain, somebody's confidentiality. We are not going to drive an absurd result there. We are not going to do something that doesn't make sense. We are, and this is the second point, trying very hard to be able to produce data from the services that we work with folks on that helps inform what we do going forward, that helps inform an analysis of what works, and I think really importantly for us, helps inform who we're serving and whether there are disparities in outcomes based on a person's characteristics. And just to be very specific about that, we have a very clear understanding and vision in this levy and in King County generally that race, above all else, is the primary driver of disparity, at least in the United States of America. And that there is just a ton of empirical evidence that black men, for example, have very different outcomes given the same social conditions as white men. And so one of the reasons we are really interested in being able to generate what we're calling individual level data is to be able to begin to link characteristics of a person so that we can understand what those disparities might look like. So again, having been on the other side of this, I totally get the reflexive, I'm not telling you anything about the people I serve, just give me the money and get out of my way. I totally get it. And what we want to do is work with organizations that receive awards from this process and come up with a way that makes sense to both promote and support the organization's ability to do what it has to do and retain client confidentiality, but also to enable us to really figure out what's going on at the system level and to be able to make decisions based on that. So an example, go ahead, Lily.
I was just going to ask you what you envision. I mean, certainly names of clients wouldn't have to be disclosed, but demographic information, typical race, age, marital status, family composition, things like that. Things like that.
We have included a template in the RFP of what that looks like. You are absolutely correct that we are not seeking necessarily names, particularly where you'd be prohibited from doing it in the first place. And so I think, does the solution look like there's some sort of randomly generated identifier that an organization provides, and it could be 1, 2, 3, 4. It could be circle, square, triangle, rhombus. And then I know, again, and this is where we want to have the conversation, I know that there's even sensitivity around a particular combination of attributes that might, be identifiable, and we want to work with you on that. Examples of things that we've already heard and struck from anything that we're going to ask, we're not going to ask anyone's immigration status. We're just not. And if you see that on anything, don't answer it. So we're not going to be pulling that type of information. Should we have addresses? I don't think we should have addresses at least in a compelled way. Some folks might want to, get back in contact or have the ability for the organization to get back in contact with them. And then the other thing that we're weighing is all of you have some sort of client data system already. And so we are not trying to drive some sort of absurd workload here where you're dual entering in multiple systems. And so many of you have systems that actually can generate reports that you can actually control the contents of. And so the ability to generate an individual level report that contains the attributes that we would negotiate in a contract is what we're driving towards here. And a particular organization might say, hey, we are good with gender as long as you define it in an inclusive way. And we are good with, but we will not give you the last 4 of somebody's social security number under no circumstances. Some people don't have them and we don't want to ask about them. Or we don't want to ask every person their disability status. Those are conversations that I think we'll have at an individual level with awardees. And again, balancing those two ideas that we are not going to do anything that's stupid. So we're not going to make you do something stupid or ask you to do something stupid. And at the same time, we do have this responsibility to be able to demonstrate what's working and to be able to assess where, as we take a look at continuing to fund programs. And frankly, there's a lot more, public expectation that we fund programs that work, that we can show that these programs work. So long way of getting to the point of this slide, which is that we have a very particular methodology that we're employing called results-based accountability. In a really short way, results-based accountability really works on 2 levels. The book that is sort of the primary text for results-based accountability, the title kind of says it all, which is that trying hard is not good enough. That's the title of the book. And that's the premise, that we should be rewarding results and that we should be promoting folks that achieve results versus folks that just tried hard. And the way that we assess that, and this is the 2 levels, there's an initial assessment that goes on at what we call the population level. What are the sort of population issues that we see? And that really informs this question, the answer to the question of what should we do? We've done a first round of that. And the result of assessing those population indicators, one of the results is that we should prevent inappropriate housing loss. And so that's why we have this strategy and why it shows up in both the transition plan and in the implementation plan. The next part of accountability is program accountability, performance measures. And that is distinct from population level assessment, where you basically say everybody in King County, what does that look like? Now we're saying for a particular program, how have they performed for the people that they serve? The thing that always becomes problematic and why we spend some time on this is a lot of people try to link those two things inappropriately. And so they say, we have funded legal services organization X, and yet the eviction rate at the population stayed the same, or the foreclosure rate stayed the same. And that's unrealistic unless you gave somebody $10 million a year and enough to serve everybody in the state that was experiencing that issue, or everyone in the county that was experiencing that issue. And so the sophistication in the system really comes to the fact that you choose what to do based on what the population is experiencing, but you assess and work with programs based on what they can control. So you don't set up unrealistic expectations. And then you come back after a period of performance and you look at the population indicators and you say, does it still look like we should generally be doing the same thing? And then you can come back to the programs and then assess on the particular programs. And the three questions that we're going to ask in performance measures for any particular program are how much did you do, how many people did you serve, how many cases did you open, how many hours did you provide, how well. And these are measures. You can see examples of them. Gretchen has included, I think, a really useful sort of example of what those look like in the RFP packet. And then, is anyone better off? So of the people that the program served, what do those outcomes look like? And many of you generate all of this information already and are very well familiar with this because you've had to, write innumerable responses to RFPs where you give the client story that just demonstrates all the different issues that you see at a societal level. So I don't think that this is anything new. In fact, the only thing that I think is novel about this particular approach is that it very clearly delineates between the population level survey that goes into deciding what to do, but then makes a clean logical break between what a particular program can accomplish and limiting that in its assessment only to the people that they serve. And that's actually something that we see a lot of folks blurring those lines, and I think it leads to a lot of unrealistic expectations and a lot of frustration. So any questions on results-based accountability? This isn't a big sort of scored part of the RFP response, but we do want to be really clear that one, it's a partnership, and so these are going to be things that are negotiated, but two, we are going to have 67 programs funded in this levy, and of those programs, many of them will have multiple contractors, and we do have to have some ability to have a common core of things that we're measuring so we can roll up and aggregate the overall effectiveness of the levy.
I have a question, Leo. So in the RFP, it says that performance measures will be established as a payment point. What does that mean?
So the overall sort of term du jour is performance-based contracting. And the question is, for us, if we are attempting to ensure that results are what we're achieving, if trying hard is not good enough, on what criteria do you determine whether or not performance in a contractual sense was sufficient that payment happens? You can go way too far with it, where you're making it too hard and you're not supporting organizations, and organizations begin to contort themselves in ways just to get paid that don't actually serve the client well. Not going to do that. You could not go far enough with it where organization X and organization Y have wildly different outcomes and quality of service, and yet they get paid exactly the same. Whereas at a system level, you might actually think that you'd want to underpay or retract from one and then reinforce the successful program. And then you can try to hit the sweet spot, which is what we're trying to do there. And so I think it's got to be a negotiated thing. I think very particular to the individual program, but when we get to the end of the period of performance, contractor, how do you think we should have measured whether or not you were successful is really the form of the question. We asked that question in a series of community engagement meetings about a year ago now almost. And so we have some ideas of what that looks like. And frankly, the majority of that response came back with, well, you shouldn't just count how many people they serve, but you should count how many people they serve, and maybe there's a minimum that becomes a payment point. People really want to feel respected, and so maybe there's a way to support organizations in prioritizing that by customer service, survey, and maybe in the first quarter there's actually no payment point associated with that until we sort of normalize, but in the second or third quarter we experiment with what a payment point looks like there. At least 50% of the people who receive your service should indicate that they thought it helped them. So identifying a couple of those, but again, I think the theme here is you can do it in a way that's stupid, and you can do it in a way that's stupid, and we want to try to do it in a way that's smart, and that's going to require working with the people that we're working with. So we are in no way going to drive an absurd result there, but we are also not going to not have a payment or performance aspect at all.
Yeah, is working with our performance measurement and evaluation team. There is one of the handouts on the table are the anticipated data elements that may be asked as part of client level reporting. That's still in transition, and so don't take that to the bank just yet. But you'll see that there's a fair amount of things that are measured there, and this is our years of learning as well. And so we do want to track and understand more than typical, but we also recognize not every one of those should be held to payment standards. Much of it is informational, and as Leo has said, it really will be a partnering, negotiated role of what really makes the difference at the end of the day in your services, that defines your service, that should be a payment, what is informational, how will we join that learning circle together?
Thank you.
The last piece to point out, and there's this little yellow thing to remind me about it, TACB, Technical Assistance and Capacity Building. So one of the aspects of the levy, we won't get into all of its mechanics, but before you actually divide its annual proceeds into thirds, we actually take 1% out of the total annual proceeds, and we must spend that to provide technical assistance and build the capacity of small organizations that actually provide the services. And so where we do, in working with the contractor, identify that there's actually an issue, the reaction is not, all right, we don't pay them. The reaction is, what creates that issue, and could the provision of additional resources solve that issue? And then we have resources to actually back that up. 1% turns out to be about $56 million, or $560,000 a year in the first year. So it's not an unsubstantial amount of money. And there might be, for example, a response that says, you're asking for a lot of data. We don't have the capacity to generate that data because we're a two-person shop. It would really be helpful to us if you could actually pay an organization to help us do some of our data analysis. That is something that's possible with technical assistance and capacity building funds. We actually perform really well, but our financial situation is a mess. And if you audited us, you would not fund us anymore. Well, we can provide assistance through technical assistance and capacity building to fund an audit, and then take a look at the findings there, and then not in a punitive way say, what are the solutions to this look like? So historically, I think we'll be the first to admit that the relationship has been all responsibility, all mandate, and no support or funds. And we recognize that and are trying to do better there, where if we identify some sort of issue, we don't immediately go into non-payment or sanction, to use contract language. We go into problem-solving mode, and we go into, as Gretchen said, let's get into this learning circle together, figure out what's going on, and see if we can help solve that problem under the theory that you receive the award as an organization because you're going to do good work. And that's just the bottom line assumption. Well, it's been a lot of time here. I already previewed it. It's just something to take care to understand in applications and really in program design. I know that many organizations receive other funding sources than just what King County provides, despite what King County might like to think sometimes. And I know that other eligibility requirements come with that. I think ours are probably among the most inclusive, and for veterans, as I mentioned, I'm not aware of anything that's more inclusive than the way that we've defined veteran. And so the expectation would be that folks who receive, or organizations that receive levy funds, would be open to serving the full diversity of folks that present themselves as long as they're eligible. And again, these are not really finely and intricately built definitions. They are very inclusive.
So there's no real income guidelines in that side.
I think we'd want to, it's another point of negotiation with a particular contract core. We recognize that many of you are already balancing a number. Our intent is to serve low-income households, low-income veterans, low-income seniors. But if we can go to you and say, what are your existing income thresholds? And you say, you know, we serve people up to 250% of the federal poverty level or at 60% AMI, rather than us saying, well, we need you to do 60% AMI or whatever the FPL is, we can conform to a sensible existing regulation. And then I think from our perspective, it's just at that point, who's not getting served as we take a look at the data we generate, and do we need to adjust from there? So do we need to give you the ability to serve somebody up to 300% FPL because in your observation, you're actually seeing a lot of people who aren't eligible for, you know, in legal services, LSC funded stuff, even by exception, but they're still indigent or low income because of how expensive it is to live in King County. And is there some common sense way to bridge that gap? That gets to that flexibility of what can only the levy do. The levy can make those adjustments. And so again, we don't have to drive these absurd results. We can create systems that make a little bit more sense or help fill gaps that exist in funding streams for other contractors. Some of or just to say who can apply. Again, I think it's relatively broad. Community-based organizations, tribal organizations, or government entities, in the way that we've defined community-based organizations, just to note, is inclusive of something that might not be recognized as a tribe by some people, but is recognized as a tribe by other people. But that's a really inclusive, again, set of entities that are eligible to apply. And then key staff and staffing levels. This just gets into some of the questions that you'll see presented within the RFP. What we recognize is that at the end of the day, services are provided by people, and you have to have the right people providing the services to be effective. We also recognize that one of the major things that has correlated to underperformance in past contracts in the levy is turnover. Not having the right people or not being able to keep the right people in place. I don't want to pretend that we're going to solve the nonprofit wage issue in one fell swoop here, but it's something that we're aware of. And if we get to the end and we have some time, I'll talk a little bit about some contributors to, I think, what the solution is that the levy is actually going to fund. One of which is a nonprofit wage survey that would be free to any nonprofit in King County, which is something that doesn't currently exist right now. Gretchen's a good idea, actually. Timeline-wise, just to hit this, so this is the part where we are less flexible, frankly, because this is an open, competitive process where everyone who would like to apply has the same right or ability. We do have to be pretty stringent, or not even pretty, we have to be stringent with these. So you can see the timeline here. We are at May 30th, which is the bidders conference. You can see a final day to ask questions being June 4th. The reason we have a final day to ask questions is really we have to be able to turn around and answer and then make it publicly available to anybody who would like to see it through the frequently asked questions. And so we won't be able to answer that question, you know, at 11:52 p.m. on June 4th, 8 minutes before it's due. We will have issued that updated FAQ by June 5th. And then you can see when the responses are due and then the contracts begin. So we're looking to move relatively aggressively on this. We do, again, have some flexibility in terms of the actual start date of a contract and its effective start date. We have a little bit of flexibility on. And then if you link this to what was on the previous slide about staffing, for somebody who's proposing a program that doesn't already exist or an enhancement to a program that doesn't already exist or some type of program that would actually require additional staffing, I think that's got to be part of the conversation in the timeline is what period of startup is required. And again, that's something that we'll be able to negotiate with folks in a way that makes sense. So Zoom grants, depending on one's affinity for computer-based solutions, this is either awesome or terrible. But I think what we can just say with clarity is that we are only accepting applications for this request for proposal, and in fact for all requests for proposal, in this program called Zoom Grants. This is becoming the King County standard, and it is certainly now the King County standard within our department, which is the Department of Community and Human Services. If one gets computers, it's relatively intuitive. If one did not get computers, it has the ability to call for help within the program. Or you could send a question to us as long as it's on time, and we can either direct you to somebody who can help or publish a response in the frequently asked questions. But just to say it, there is no piece of paper to timestamp and get to a particular place at any particular time. You will complete an application if you would like to within the program. We can see if they've been opened. We can see where people have an issue and ask a technical question about it, and a little red flag actually shows up, and it'll show up in Gretchen's inbox, and then we'll get to work on trying to solve that problem. But I think with Zoom grants, the bottom line is start early with it, because there's a little bit of an acclimation period of, oh, how does this work, and if you've used, it's like a lot of other software programs, you don't have to enter any code anywhere. But it's not something to open up for the first time on the last day of the application, which I only say because that's probably what I would do. Okay.
I'm a little croaky, so apologies, but this will be some of the technical aspects of navigating the Zoom grants application. And can I see a show of hands who has gone in and started an account or registered themselves in there? So it's was it pretty intuitive? And okay, so what you will do is go to that Zoom grants link. It will bring you to something like this, and if you are the first time in it, it requires you to register even before you can open up and see the RFP. But it's very intuitive and easy to do, and you see that one of my first ones when I was trying to understand how to use it, the senior center RFP, I logged myself in as Gretchen Bruce Hotmail, so this is my personal. Then you'll begin to see this, very easy. You would click on apply or preview if you just want to be able to understand it. The things that I really want you to understand about navigating here and make sure that you do not miss is the library. And I'm going to back up just a little bit. So the first one is going to be the description. It's the overall highlights of the RFP, pretty much a review of the first page overview of the paper document that if you clicked it open and see. But the library has all the listings of the documents that are here, and the things that Leo has talked about, how we're trying to create system connection hubs, a very responsive way to looking at human services and the way we work together as partners and entities, and the way that individuals access services. And so Denise made the point that the RFP is a little daunting, and we wouldn't disagree, and we'll be seeking feedback about that. This one being one of the first ones going out the door, we're really trying to show the connecting points between the RFP, between the Veterans and Human Services Levy, between some of the other strategic plans of King County, and just really how we're trying to drive a learning practice, continuous improvement. So it's really hard for me to see from here and down from here. But the one things that I will want you to especially note is that while you answer the questions in Zoom grants, the budgets will be downloaded and then re-uploaded, because Zoom grants budget structure was really challenging for me to use this first time through. So the budget here is going to be 3B, 3A, 3B, and 3C. Those are some of the ones that you will very specifically need to download, become familiar with, and then re-upload back again. I really wanted to stress that.
Sorry, can I So you're basically downloading a kind of blank document, you're putting your information in it, and then you're uploading it.
Right. So that's why I highlighted with the red arrow the library as my first slide to say, make sure you check the library. Now I'm going to go back to my second slide on this. And what you'll see when you go into Applicant View or into Apply, you will see some other tabs that say Application Questions and Submitted Documents. This is now when we're getting into the real basis of what you're working in. The application questions will begin with which portion of the funding are you applying for and by which population, so that we're just really, really clear. You are applying to do dispute resolution with veterans. You are applying to do housing counseling for both populations, however that comes through. This is where you'll simply put an X in the box, and then this, these open boxes is where you will answer the questions. That follows, you'll want to review the RFP and the narrative questions to understand the thinking and the content behind them, because that gets pretty prescriptive about, like, tell us about this, now tell us about this, tell us about the connecting point between these two things. I am limited in my ability to provide that level of detail in this high-level question, so you will want this beside you at the very same time that you're answering these questions, because this is going to drive how you get scored and the points that you earn for your competitiveness. Many organizations are finding it much easier to complete their first round answers in Word and then do a character analysis, because this really is limited by characters. So I would recommend doing it in that phased approach.
And then you cut it and paste it in?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And it does not accept formatting, sorry to say. So if you are really highlighting something important and special, you'll lose your bolds, you'll lose your tabs, and those sort of things. You might want to figure out how to, if that becomes important to you, how to do that with periods or other space features.
And just to, someone might look at the questions and say, gosh, these are, as Gretchen said, really prescriptive questions. Just to sort of pull the curtain back on what's going on there. We receive quite a bit of feedback on RFPs generally, and the gist of it is we have no idea what you're looking for. And then that leads to how was this scored fairly? And so what we have tried to do here is to be very clear and transparent. These are the factors on which your response for this question will be scored by a panel of folks who are both from King County and not from King County. And so what is and appears to be a prescriptive question form is really a response to, I think, an expectation and a responsibility that we be very clear and not try to hide anything. This is how these responses will be evaluated, and these are the instructions that we are going to provide to a panel to look for these things in each response.
Back again to the library. On the last page of the RFP is going to be a list of attachments. Those are all the attachments that are loaded up in the library, again, to help you be your most responsive and to write your best application. I encourage you to look through all of these. At the very least, click them open, know that they're there, know a sense of the content of them. It'll help inform a better application. The two that you must complete and turn in are the, oops, that wasn't an actual link.
It is open on Internet Explorer if you want to open that in the lower left-hand corner. I think I have
Oh, yes,
open
Alan
there.
would have thought about that ahead of time for me.
There you go. And the third tab, I think it was there.
I really can't see this in this.
Yeah, it's difficult with that pink screen now.
Okay.
Do preview, it'll be easier. There you go.
Library. Come on down. I have the budget forms to complete. Open. And I've given an example right to the side so that you can really track how the math flows. I mean, most of the formulas are in there. We'll keep them the information that needs to go from one to the next. So, but if you're really trying to understand, and if things inadvertently get overwritten, this will help you understand how the answers flow together. The first one becomes the personnel detail. And as Leo was saying, we want to support and assure that you have the required staffing that it needs to do this and do it well and do it right. And so we want to know, what are the titles of those? How many hours will they be spending on it? Because it will help inform, whether someone's putting 10 hours a week or 40 hours a week. Shows the depth of the services that are being provided.
And just to, if I can emphasize this, there is not a scoring criteria of did they pay as little as they could get away with to their staff. And it's because, well, one, there's this sort of artificial, I think, delineation between service costs and staff costs. But in almost every type of service that we're talking about here, the staff is the service. The people are what provides the services. And so we said that in the beginning, we'll say it again here. There's not some pressure, I don't think we're going to be funding $200,000 salaries for anyone, but there's not some pressure that, gosh, these guys are going to pay, their folks 10% of what a normal, sort of private industry person would get. These guys are going to do 12%, so let's go with the 10%. That is not part of the expectation, because we have learned that it just comes back to you when you lose those people, and then you get brand new, folks in providing the services again. So there is no stated or implied expectation to skim the amount of money that would otherwise go to quote unquote services, because the people are the services. So we're looking for something that's reasonable, obviously, but we are not. There's not a criteria that says, gosh, these guys pay less, so therefore it's a stronger application. So any questions on that?
Reinforcing that, of all the points available in the RFP, the budget is worth at least 5 points. And half or more than 3 points of that, or the 3 points, the majority is, did you describe the budget well? Did you explain what goes into it to provide the service? And cost effectiveness is 2 points, but it's really about does it hold together? Very quickly, the other thing is just what's the overall operating budget, including rent and the other costs. Noting that we do want some on-site presence at King County Veterans Programs, either here or in Belltown, and you won't be responsible for operating costs of those spaces. Those will be provided in kind. When it comes to coordinating with the senior centers, that will be a point of negotiation and conversation, but we will be part of that conversation too, to try to make sure that those links are being made and that we're creating the systemic connection, not that that's on your shoulders to create out of whole cloth. And then the final tab is service projections, and this is where we're just trying to get a sense of how many do you anticipate that you can do given your expertise, given your experience providing these types of services and knowing the standard client. How many with the staffing you propose you should be able to accomplish. The whole thing there is don't err towards the most complicated client that you get. Don't err towards the easiest clients you get. Go for the average and then tell us, how many you would do an intake, how many would get full representation, how many would get like an action plan where you are really holding their hand as they deliver it or get through it. You wanted to make a point here about full representation, at least for the civil legal side.
Yes. So, and I think this is likely constrained or restrained just to the civil legal portions of this, which could either be in the civil legal to prevent inappropriate housing loss or in the public benefits piece, is that we do have an interest in funding folks to provide full representation, particularly in unlawful detainers, but in other cases as well. And this is another sort of feedback that we have gotten both from clients and from service providers themselves, that full representation is very person intensive. You're not going to get hundreds and hundreds of clients per attorney, but it's the thing we're missing in our system, and particularly in the legal system. We are missing the ability to represent somebody in an unlawful detainer, which is not to undercut any of this fantastic work that day of organizations might provide or that quick advice and assistance can provide. But as we take a look at the overall system, particularly for unlawful detainers, the gap is the ability to actually have a lawyer take your case from beginning to end and actually represent you and not send you to Washington Law Help to, this is what you would fill out. This is what pro se means. So there's not a requirement that you must submit a proposal if you're a civil legal aid provider for only full representation, but we are interested in finding and receiving applications that do provide for full representation, again, particularly in unlawful detainers. And this really gets back to this initial issue that we saw where 2% of tenants historically have been represented in unlawful detainers. The thing we didn't say in this meeting is 98% of landlords traditionally have been represented. And when we look at other jurisdictions, namely San Francisco and New York, that have created at least statutory rights to counsel for some folks in evictions, they get better outcomes. The number of evictions is going down in those jurisdictions, and that's something that we're looking to replicate on the short term here through the transition plan, and something, just to preview it, in the implementation plan as we have proposed it, and if it comes through from the council in a similar fashion, we will be looking to support in an even larger way there.
So then after completing these forms, you would save it onto your own computer so that it's available for uploading later on. You would go to the upload section, then it would hit, which one, name it, browse it, find it, and then upload it. And next, now Adam, how do I get out of this?
Yeah,
Back
just close
to
it. There you go. Now you're back on Zoom grants.
There we are.
Mm-hmm.
I've shown that. I've shown that. That was the last slide, explaining the library and explaining downloading and uploading. Okay, so let's go back to you.
So there have been a ton of questions. Are there any questions?
I'm really interested in this idea of partnership with other organizations and collaboration. Do you have any suggestions? Do you have any kind of built-in mechanisms to encourage that and discourage some of the competition that might happen?
So I think we really
Press
see it on
F5.
two axes. There's the question of sort of like organization to like organization partnership. And there is also the question of organization to community partnership. So I'll start there. I think, again, we have structured this RFP in such a way that we are baking in some community to service organization partnership through the hub model. And so in some ways that's kind of taken care of, going to a senior center or some set of senior centers that are close to the MRJC in Kent, for example, and providing intake services there is a way to promote that partnership with organizations or with community. You might also say that, we have a really strong relationship with El Centro de la Raza or with an East African meal program that we happen to be aware of in our community. And what we would like to propose is, in addition to taking 80% of the cases from the King County or from a senior center, that we would actually like to work with this particular meal program. I don't know how you would have met them already, but if any of those things do exist, I think we're going to get this in a lot more formal way on a longer term contract. It becomes a lot to ask in a 1-year period of performance, frankly. But that type of thing is what we're hoping for. Now, organization to organization, I think many providers already do this in their RFPs, which is that we specialize in this type of service or case, and then when we get this other type that we know comes up a lot, we refer those over to X, and here is some evidence of that formal relationship. I think we want to see, what we're hoping to see, is what is already out there, and that's going to inform the next RFP. The advantage of a transition year is we kind of get a year to figure out what's already happening. And then I think that's where we'll try to formalize some sort of promotion of partnership in a scoring kind of way for an RFP or in an evaluative way for performance. So to answer your question, Lily, there's not a ton of formal structure within this thing that would promote partnership, and it's really sort of a value at this point. And it's one that we know that you share. ESJ is that way, what we call equity and social justice in the county. That's another one where you're going to see a lot of language in forms of reports that are around equity and social justice. And what we've tried to make very clear is that in many cases, the organizations that would apply have been doing that work for a very long time and would have been doing it better than King County. In some cases, not. But in any case, that it is something that we are trying to do better at King County and trying to sort of raise the standard of practice amongst all of our contractors about, and we're as ready to learn from other organizations as we are to teach other organizations there.
I have an addition. There is one of the attachments is, I think it's number 5, the site partners. And this includes the locations of the physical addresses of the KCVP offices, as well as about 35 senior centers, some large, some quite small, with whom you might consider partnering. It is organized by King County District in the background. But so there's a little bit of regional distribution to how this is clumped together. We aren't expecting that you will, prior to your application, go out and create these formal partnerships, but more that you have a sense like, I think that this would be the grouping that I might be with, that might be over there. But the other thing, as part of the contracting process and requirements, you'll see in one of the attachments an exhibit that says you'll participate in 2 levy convened meetings per year. Well, in the senior center RFP that's out right now, they will have the same expectation. And we anticipate that at one of those meetings, we'd be able to introduce to them, hey, we've created some partnerships and links for you that when you have these kinds of issues coming up for your clients, we've ready-made some facilitated referral processes, some people who are welcome your referrals. Let's get you connected to that. So trying to pave the way for you for that.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? So building the relationship and making the connection to be able to partner with these entities, is that something that could be part of the proposal, or it's not necessarily expected to be in place by June 13th?
Correct. In fact, in the service categories of the 3rd tab of the budget, one of the examples was outreach to senior centers, like how many I think I might do, recognizing that that's not a household unit, but a center unit.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Jeff, question.
Yeah, and so to that end, kind of the idea of hubs really is providing services either in these senior centers or at the veterans, right? And so is that what you're talking about when you talk about hubs? And I'm curious then to that end, do you want the majority of services to be in those spaces, or you just like, we're concentrated on the population, right? So we can provide kind of in our spaces, but there have to be a certain amount of hours that we provide services. How does that work?
We're looking, so the problem we're trying to solve, and the one that we just hear over and over again, is it's too hard to navigate the system. Right. It's too complicated. And so the way that we'd like to promote it is to not necessarily require the provision of services at a particular place, but to require at least access to the services from a particular place, and that particular place being senior centers, maybe a specific one or several, or the King County Veterans Program for veterans. But please do not mistake that as you must only provide services at a senior center. Some of the models that you might provide are actually court-based. Many of them might be, and so it's just a question of if there was the Crosscut article about 2 months ago, and it's a senior center director, and she's saying people used to come here for bingo, and now they come here because they don't have a house. I can give them bingo. I don't have anything to give them if they are about to get evicted, and we want to give them something. And what's happening in parallel is a major investment in senior centers from this levy in King County. King County spends about $150,000 a year on senior centers total. We're going to spend $3.7 million on senior centers this year. And if the implementation plan goes forward as proposed, we'll be at $4 million per year for senior centers. So senior centers drive their ability to increase levels of participation and make them more inclusive, frankly, because they are not particularly inclusive places in some cases right now, and then drive access to services for seniors through them. And then we think the theory here that we're going to test is that you begin to build a system where somebody can go to a senior center, present that issue, and actually have a resource available to them.
So the program can either happen, like we can either just do it by providing outreach to senior centers or veterans programs, or like wanting to provide services at those spaces. It can be either or.
Correct.
Okay, great.
Other questions? Anybody on the phone? I know it's sometimes hard to break in from the phone.
I had a quick question on your demographics and your data points, and I was wondering, does King County have a link to current demographic and data start points? Does that make sense?
We do. Well, we have them in several forms.
The current ones tend to be driven by the contracts that you are operating under.
For seniors, because we prepared it for the Senior Center RFP, we actually have a really extensive sort of interactive map and listing of seniors across
that kind of demographics.
Across the county that we can provide a link to. That's Marcy's Senior Center demographics map. We don't, I think, just to be frank, we don't have a similar analysis that's readily available for veterans.
Okay, so you don't have a data start point for who's existing and how that's going to be ticked away at with this levy.
We do have data start points. I think I understand your question a little bit better now. We do have data start points for seniors, and then within the I hate to refer you back to a big document. Within the transition plan and implementation plan for the levy, both of those plans actually have quite a bit of sort of preface and table setting in terms of defining the issues. And All Home is the other place that we'll send where we've done quite a lot of race and ethnicity based, very specific tracking of who is experiencing homelessness and who is not. And so there are very clear, I think, data start points in terms of what ethnicities, what races of persons inside of King County are disproportionately experiencing homelessness. Just as a headline, African Americans or persons who are black, Alaska Natives and American Indians are two populations that just have extraordinarily disproportionate rates of homelessness, poverty, incarceration, a number of those issues. And those are, we see those features absolutely inside of the All Home data, and it also shows up inside of our senior specific data.
Okay, great. And the senior link to your senior data, will that be in the frequently asked questions?
Yes.
Answers?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So, go ahead, Janice.
Well, I had a question, and I'm just trying to find the part of the document where it was. So,
While Denise looks, just as a sort of cap to this, we have a crisis of homelessness in King County that surprises no one. One thing that surprises some people is we actually house a lot of people in King County. So the last one night count had about 11,000 total if you count sheltered and unsheltered persons experiencing homelessness. And yet, in that same year, we housed or had people otherwise exit the homelessness system upwards of 20,000 people. And so part of the solution has to be preventing homelessness. And that's where this RFP is really coming from. How do you stem part of the inflow? We know it's evictions. We know whether they be formal or informal. We know it's foreclosures. We know it's just feeling like you can't pay your rent. We know it's habitability issues. We know it's concerns that because of who you are, you might not have the same access to the legal system as other people. And so this doesn't come out of the blue. It's very much a part of a much larger scale strategy that gets even larger in 2019 through 2023 to prevent folks from becoming homeless when we can prevent it. And so that's where this fits in a larger set of results that we're trying to build a system around.
Under the housing counseling section, it says the RFP anticipates selecting a single entity providing services to both veterans and seniors to allow the program to achieve economy and efficiency of scale. So the entire award that's listed there is anticipated to go to one organization.
Anticipates a key verb there. So it's not requires. As you can see with the scale of resources, that's one where, splitting it in half, I think, makes it hard to do anything for a year. And the theory is that particularly here, there's actually, the service might not actually look that different, although you have to know the people that you're serving. So that's the theory behind that, and certainly we're just trying to message that someone should feel welcome to apply that way, although somebody who does not apply that way would not be considered insufficient at the door.
Okay.
I don't know if you have anything to add to that question.
And then when we apply, so for example, if an entity does both housing counseling and public benefits advocacy, they can sort of combine and just indicate in that little grid that they're applying for both.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Good point. We didn't presume to specify how you have to submit your application. So you could submit, if you're going for all of it, 8 applications, or you could submit 1. Up to you then to clearly delineate what is attributed to which. We think it will be easier to do it as 1, and we want to err towards simplicity, but however is easiest for you in your planning.
And Lily, maybe this is another sort of set of or line of response to your question, which is that's another way, I guess, that you could propose a partnership is this is a joint application between this housing counseling service and this legal aid organization to partner.
That's in my notes. Talk to Tunisia.
We can recommend no specific provider to do any of that, but I think that's certainly something that we've contemplated that could be a cool thing to try for a year.
Question about Section 8 vouchers and preserving those. That's going to fall under the eviction prevention as opposed to the public benefits portion, because the public benefits, I understand, is the application of filing application as opposed to preserving.
It's an interesting question. I think so. I will give an unsatisfactory answer, which is I think you could probably construe that either way or propose a combination that was responsive to both housing choice and the VASH equivalent. So I'm not sure that I hadn't thought about it that way, I guess, is the real answer, and I think it very clearly fits into either of those categories. I don't know if you have anything to add on that. Whether preservation of Section 8 is eviction prevention or public benefits.
But if you tackle it as a public benefits, are you duplicating VASH and VOLT and those other systems that are out there?
Well, and as you're pointing out, it might be at what point in a process you're trying to do something with the voucher, whether there's an imminent eviction, in which case I think there's a really clear eviction prevention nexus. If there's no, pending unlawful detainer.
One of the bigger issues that we're seeing is people that do have Section 8 vouchers, and perhaps they have a disability and we can get them extended. That population, especially when you're talking about seniors. The population,
So one thing that's actually not helpful to your question, but just to know, is that we are at the same time actually investing several $1 million in master leasing and shell rent subsidy programs that are aimed at trying to help the shopper issue of not being able to lease up within the period in which a person can shop. So just to be aware of that, it's actually a much larger set of resources that we are directing towards negotiating with landlords or building owners, and actually as a condition of us guaranteeing your rent for the next 2 years, you will lease only to shoppers of the vouchers. And so there are other levy funds that are going to trying to solve that issue. So I don't know that so to answer the question from a legal perspective, that is not an ineligible use of the funds. I think the context there is that there are other levy funds that are going to that. All right, if there are no further questions, I think we'll hang around for a little bit, certainly. And just thanks for what you all do. We are really excited about having the chance to bring new money and eventually more new money to really support people who do important work in the community.
Question?
Yes?
So will the implementation plan RFP process be around the same time next year with a sort of similar time?
Excellent question.
Application period?
If we think about this as a 6-month or a 6-year process,
Yeah.
and Denise jokes, but I think it's a well-founded joke, that we are really sort of trying to create space for ourselves right now.
Yeah.
And so, levy passage in November, appropriation in April, RFP, May, June, awards in August. Give ourselves a year. This is the transition year. And we're immediately going to go back into RFP planning for the subsequent 5-year period as soon as we know what's actually in that plan. And so to answer your question, what we anticipate is a period of performance that looks like August to the end of July next year, and then being able to release an RFP closer to March, April of next year, and then being able to provide a notice about the RFP probably January, just to get to, I think, what are more sustainable timelines. But we are not there right now.
And other than, I think you were mentioning that each of the different 4 services are sort of their own program under the implementation plan if it's approved by council. Would, other than that exception, it be a fairly similar kind of layout and similar questions and similar expectations and priorities?
Yes, and based on your feedback. One of the attachments that is there is we also get feedback from council. How will you continue to improve your process? And 3 weeks after closing, we'll be sending out a survey to you because we really do want to make this better with your feedback and helping us understand. And we'll ask, what was the language that worked, the process that worked, the forms that worked, how can they be simplified? Because we think that they can be. This is our first one out the door, so we welcome that. The other thing is, having written more than a few grant applications myself, when you're answering the questions, go for simplicity, go for ease of answers. You don't have to convince us through a well-worded narrative why this needs to be done. We've already done that through the transition plan and the implementation plan. You just need to get to what I'm going to do about it with clarity.
That is very helpful to hear.
For the implementation plan, so I've been looking at it. How likely are the figures to be approved, would you say?
So it is at my hazard that I attempt to predict or direct or presume to do any of that. I mean, the council really appropriately has the ability to make any changes that they want to. So I would be guessing, and I have no inside information to base that guess on. We certainly proposed it with a lot of input from council members, but they get to make any changes they want to.
Question about program design and client involvement or community involvement in the design. Obviously, we don't have time to involve the community in this new design. Are we talking really about, so a service like mine has been in existence for 25 years. I don't need public design, but we have this design. Is that more about the individual client's involvement and being able to direct the services? Or is it more about how you plan on providing this service and reaching out to the veterans organizations and the senior services?
The second part of what you've asked, I think we take for granted that any organization operating in this space has a really healthy understanding of client-centered service. In some cases, it's mandatory, and in other cases, I think it's just a best practice. It's to be candid about it. I think the observation, at least that I just personally have, that has influenced a lot of this is that first part, or the second part of what you described, the community connection, is actually where there's a lot of weakness in our system. That's not for every organization, but we actually, in some of these services, tend not to be as accountable and open to the community and to specific communities. And I think there's a lot of room for growth there. But I think, legal services, you have to take direction from your client outside a couple, parameters. And so we're presuming that folks are doing that. Okay. So I think that's all we got. We will hang around, although after we say this is over, our questions will become far less helpful because the form of the answer will be, we will update an FAQ and post it to the website for you. So if there are any last minute questions, otherwise I do not want to cause people to linger. And thank you again for what you do, and thank you for coming. All right.
Thank you. This was very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks for everyone on the phone. Again, this will be posted on our website as well in case you would like to rewatch it or link it to someone else.
Yeah, exactly.